important when determining their interest rate. You can have a not awesome credit score and still get a really great rate on a VA loan. And so if you're dealing with people who are veterans, it's something that you definitely want to consider. And shockingly, some of them don't know that they have eligibility. So one of the questions we ask when we're doing a loan application is, have you or your spouse ever served in the military? And if the answer is yes, we always look into whether they've got VA eligibility. If you would like to know how those work, what the differences are, feel free to reach out to me and I can give you kind of a quick primer on things you need to know as a listing or a buyer's agent when it comes to VA loans. But one really cool piece right now for buyers is if someone has been in the military in the last 5 years, so they've separated from the military in the last 5 years, or if they meet certain criteria moving to Utah and buying their first home in Utah, they can get a $2,500 grant that doesn't depend on their income. It doesn't depend on where they buy. It's literally money that just shows up at closing for $2,500, and we can help them with that application. There are 115 of these left for the calendar year. So if you know anybody who's a veteran that's out looking or thinking of looking, or you work with people in the veteran community, it's a really great opportunity to help people save a little bit of money, get a really great rate. And if you need to understand more about how VA loans work from a buyer's or seller's perspective, reach out. I'm happy to give you more details. A widow can get a VA loan, Whitney, but it depends on the eligibility. There's some really specific criteria on that. In general terms, the veteran had to have been 100% disabled, or they had to have deceased due to a service-related activity. So if they died after being in service, if they were 100% disabled, then the disability, then the eligibility conveys to the widow. Every situation is different, and there's a couple of carve-outs for that. If you've got a scenario you want me to give you some details on, just feel free to reach out or call me or text or email me, and I'm happy to give you some details because that is a big issue and we run into that fairly often. You bet. I'll just put my phone number in the group chat if somebody doesn't have it. You guys are welcome to call or text me anytime and just get a little bit more info if you need it.
Hey, thank you. Hey, I did see a post last week on, I think it was Facebook, one of those real estate groups, where they had a VA buyer that got shut down. And the listing agent just said, sorry, we're not going to work with VA buyers. I want to make sure that you guys aren't using any carryover grudges from the last 3 years. So in the last 3 years, when we had offers over asking price, 20 or 30 of them to choose from, the VA buyers were sometimes not the best, because you've got to sign that VA loan addendum that says if it doesn't appraise, then they can get out and get their earnest money back. And we're all, of course, saying you don't ever get your earnest money back if we even look at your offer. It was a different time. Okay. Typically the VA loans are good loans. If they qualify, I mean, if they've got the VA requirements, they're some of the easier loans to get. You do have some extra challenge, just as you would with FHA, in clearing inspections and stuff, but usually those aren't so horrible. So, in a market where—
Let me give you a caveat on that too, Eric. So I took an application from a veteran yesterday. They went under contract last night. We have an approval on them this morning, and we'll be cleared to close on the 11th with the appraisal in hand. So VA loans can go really, really fast.
Yeah. So they can be good loans. So I don't want you to carry over any, if you got in business in the last 3 years and you've got this carryover grudge that VA loans are bad somehow, they're not. Okay. They're good loans. It's just when you're bidding $20,000, $50,000, $100,000 over asking price, the appraisals aren't going to support that. And then that can cause trouble with them because they have the free out there with that. So thank you, Alan. I appreciate you bringing that up. That's a good one. Okay, let's talk. Do you guys have any questions or anything about the world going on with real estate before we get into our CE class? Okay. All right. I'll address one thing. Hopefully you guys are all subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's the Elite Agent Training YouTube channel. I'm making little videos there. Please make sure you check those out. One of the things that came up yesterday in the lawsuit, part of this discovery, is I have to go through and say, provide us with all of the training that you did for this agent over the last 7 years. And so I point to my YouTube channel, say we've got a lot of trainings there. We don't have them all recorded there, but a lot of them are there, and a lot of them address these topics that we're discussing now, which were all basically the duties required of a licensed agent, things that you should do, things that you shouldn't do. That's the part of the law that he referenced in it. But part of our response is we provide these trainings, but we don't have any way to force the agents to watch the trainings. Okay. And so I really want to make sure that you guys, my agents, are getting in there and getting those trainings. I'm trying to do little 5-minute videos. If you guys have things that you have questions on, I'm putting together some quick little videos that you guys can watch just so that you know how certain forms work, etc. So in the last few weeks, we've done several that have come up as a result of legal issues, either with other agents or just attorneys' advice or etc. But they are things that you should be aware of. So make sure that you're doing that. And then beyond that, hopefully you got the news. Next week, if you check your calendars, I don't know if Jake's made the change already. Yep, it looks like he has. So next week, there is a meeting. Jake, I don't see the meeting. Isn't it Monday? I don't see it in the calendar.
I'm seeing it on mine, Monday, 9 a.m.
That's the 9th.
I can see it as well.
Oh, do you? Okay. Oh, there it is. Sorry. It's a different color. Blacked it out. All right. So next week, we won't have a meeting on Tuesday. I'm flying to Rome. So that'll be fun. But we will have that 9 o'clock meeting down there. So if any of you guys are down around the Salt Lake area, even if you're not, it's worth it to drive down there. You get a chance to network with 4 or 5 other brokerages. They're all equity, but we just get together. I think that's at the Salt Lake board. Is that right, Jake? It's usually where they do that. So that'll be next Monday. A good chance to network for you guys, meet some other people. And usually those are pretty good meetings that they hold down there. We do those like once every 3 or 4 months is all. So it's a good opportunity if you get a chance to do that. All right. That's all I've got for news. Other than that, yeah, just anything else that I have that I'd like you guys to know. I'm making videos about it. Whenever I post them to YouTube, they're automatically shared on our Facebook group. Hopefully you're all part of our Facebook group, Equity North Branch. And you're seeing those there. So yeah, I don't have a ton of stuff to cover here that I haven't already addressed in other places. So with that, we'll turn the time over to Tucker. Where's Tucker? There you are.
I'm over here somewhere.
Hi, Tucker. I found you in the middle of all of us.
Thanks, Eric. It's a good place to be in the middle of a bunch of good agents. That's awesome.
Hey, do you want to introduce the class and tell people how to get CE credit for it and what the requirements are that you have in order to maintain that? Now, I'm recording this, so I will say that if you watch this recording after the fact, you don't get CE, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Eric. Unfortunately, it's just live CE is the only thing that this is qualified for. If you can, if you're in the group chat, just leave your license number and your name there. There's also a secondary way to do this if you can't get into the chat for whatever reason. There's a oh shoot, what am I trying to say? There's a Google link that you can do that has everything that's in there. You can just put it in there, or send me a text. I'm going to take a screenshot of everything as we go to see who's here and who's not, just so that make sure that if you're going to listen to me for an hour or whatever, make sure you get the credit. Worst thing possible is listening to me and not getting any credit for it. We have Kevin on the line with us too. Kevin from our Ogden office, great escrow officer. If you've worked with Kevin before, you know how what a good escrow officer he is, how he travels. He's just conscientious and just love working with Kevin. So let's get started. We're talking about owners associations and CC&Rs. And I wonder, Jake, if you can allow me to share my screen here real quick.
Eric, can you do that? You're the host on this one.
Sorry, working on it now.
You're just fine.
should be good.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, we're gonna go through owners associations and CCRs specifically. What I want to be able to do is just go through some things that you can know or you should know, some things that are seller disclosure, some things that are buyer due diligence, and then actually just some things that no one knows, to be honest with you, about owners associations and CC&Rs. So let me get the presentation going. Hopefully, does that look good to everybody else? Can you see what's going on?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Thank you. I talk about CC&Rs. There's actually 2 R's that go into this kind of thing. I've got covenants, conditions, restrictions, and reservations. All these things will show up on a title commitment. Sometimes they're specifically ordered under CC&Rs. Sometimes they're recorded separately. But let's look at a couple of these examples just so you know what to see. Now, in this day and age where we have hyperlinked title commitments, you'll often see, or you'll sometimes see, a reservation. That means a right retained by a grantor on a previous deed, something that they've reserved for themselves. If you've dealt with property that used to be owned by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, for example, you will notice on their stuff that you've got a mineral and water right reservation for all their things, right? So if you purchase property once owned by there, there's a good chance that this little paragraph is already there. Additionally, if you're going to buy property that the church once owned or the church owns now, they have their own addendums to the contract that are fairly specific, and they're forms for everything. So when the church sells a residential property that maybe has been deeded to them, or through inheritance or something like that, or a property that they own like desert land and livestock, you'll often see these contract forms. It's a great idea to review those with your broker, with Eric in this case, because he's seen them before and he kind of knows what your buyers should expect. A life estate is another type of reservation that we see periodically. Oftentimes with the life estate, mom and dad will deed the property to their kids. This one was a condominium, and you can kind of see at the very bottom, it says subject to a life estate from mom and dad. Life estates are kind of fun. Here's another example of one. A life estate in favor of Eula Thompson. So that means that they can live in the property. They've reserved for themselves a life estate, but they're no longer the owner of the property. When the person passes away, to get rid of the life estate, what you need to do is file a termination, or a quit claim deed. If they're still alive, you can actually do a quit claim deed as a release and get rid of that termination and terminate that life estate. Another type of reservation is homestead. People will declare them, will have a homestead declaration, where they reserve the right to a certain amount of property. It looks like it's about $42,000 on a primary residence the last time the code was updated. But you see that periodically with people who are in the bankruptcy court proceedings, or they think they may be sued later on, or people who are just have like an abundance of caution. You'll see a homestead declaration that's there. A right of first refusal. We've probably seen these before in the last couple of years, right? How many of you dealt with a builder who had a first right of refusal on a property because they didn't want the property to go under contract and have it be resold immediately, right? We see that sometimes with the first right of refusal. Okay, usually it's for a certain period of time, and there's sometimes a penalty. Sometimes the right of first refusal says I get to buy the property back at the exact price that you're offered. They just kind of vary. They're kind of independent from one another. This one says right of first refusal for as long as this person owns the property. So it extinguishes when the property is deeded to someone else. There's all that stuff that can happen. Restrictions are another thing that can come up on property. Like someone will deed the property, but you can only use it for these things, or you can or cannot do these things on the property. So this restrictive covenant was just recorded separately. It just says restriction for the construction of only one residence. So yeah, you can have this property. It's all well, fine, hunky-dory and good, but you can only put one property here. Okay, this is a deed restriction on an apartment complex. When the people bought the apartment complex, it was part of the Olene Walker Housing Fund. So it has rent controls that are based into it. So if you come into title with this one, you're subject to all these rent control agreements that the parties had with the state of Utah. Can't raise the rents without the state of Utah's permission. So all these are different deed restrictions, right? This is another deed restriction that pops up. We'll see this every once in a while, and you've probably heard of these ones before with like the Owen and Ogden or the Cache County things where for first responders. Sometimes we'll see a deed restriction specifically recorded. This is for very low or moderate income housing. And it says, hey, we're going to give you a $5,000 credit, a $5,000 subsidy to buy the home, and you don't have to pay that back as long as you live here for 5 years, right? Something will happen like that. Sometimes they're deed restrictions. Sometimes they're recorded as just a separate notation on a deed or something like that. In this case, the people were in the property. They ended up having to sell the property prior to the 5 years because the military made them move. They didn't have control. So the UCCU and whoever was there with the Utah Community Federal Credit Union, these folks, they just released the deed restriction because it met the requirements of something that didn't need to be there permanently. So there's all these kind of things that show up on properties. So we kind of see what these restrictions are, what they can look at like. They can be recorded as part of a deed or recorded as a separate entry, right? Let's get into property types for a little bit. And I think we went over this the last time, so we'll go through this pretty quickly. In Utah, we've got 3 basic types of property that are recognized by our code. We have parcels, lots, and units. So a lot is a lot in a subdivision, and a subdivision means it's been formally subdivided. It's gone through either the county or the city process to become a legal subdivision. Okay, so that's a lot in a subdivision. A unit is kind of the same thing, but it's specifically for a condominium. So we've got lots and units. Parcels are anything that is not a lot or not a unit. Right, so I'm here in Bountiful right now. I'm in the Bountiful town site plat. Okay, I'm in that square grid area, just 2 blocks from where I grew up. My parents are just 2 blocks away from me right now. We're in the Bountiful town site. Okay, the Bountiful town site, I mean, we've got lots and blocks, but it's never been subdivided. So here in the Bountiful town site, this is considered a parcel if it's a long legal. Also, if it's described by section, township, and range, meaning it's a really long legal, it's also considered a parcel. So when you're looking at your listings as a listing agent, you need to know, is the property that I'm representing, that I'm selling, is it a lot, is it a unit, or is it a parcel? Okay, one thing that kind of gets in the way is people will say, well, this is a townhome. Now, townhome is not a legal property type in Utah. Okay, you've got parcel, lot, and subdivision. Townhome, it can mean a lot of different things. So a townhome might mean it's a condo. A townhome might mean it's a PUD or a PRUD. Okay, a townhome could just be the name of the development. I want to share my screen here and show you kind of how this works a little bit. So let me share my screen to another folder that I've got here. Okay, this is hopefully this works. This is Backman's CC&R library. So, you know, for a long time, we've been keeping these covenants, conditions, and restrictions. And right now, our little library has about 5,200 files in it. And about 500 of these files, of these subdivisions with CC&Rs, are called townhomes. So about 1 in 10 developments that we have anyway. And this kind of holds true as you look at it across the state, that, you know, when we went from 4,000 to 5,000, it was still 1 in 10. They all have the name townhome. So here's Hermoso Pueblo Townhome subdivision. Okay, as you look at this, townhome can be a zoning type with the city. It can be a building type with the city, and it might just be something that some sort of name that the developer likes to say. In St. George, it seems like about 2/3 of the properties. It's not this way, but it seems like about 2/3 of the properties have townhome in the title. Some of them are subdivisions. Some of them are condos. Now, it makes a huge difference when you're putting in an offer for a buyer, what if the property is a townhome or if the is a unit in a condo versus a PUD, PRUD where it's wholly owned. Okay, so if you're working with an FHA or VA buyer and they put an offer in on something that's advertised as a townhome, if it ends up being a condo, they may not be able to get that loan. So how do you tell if something is a condo or a subdivision lot or a parcel lot? Well, there's a couple of tricks about it. One of them is you have to look at the plat map and see how it was originally developed. And we'll look at some plat maps later on. Another is to actually have to read the CC&Rs or reading the legal description. So if you're coming across a listing and it says property type townhome, that's the first question you should have with your buyer. Okay, I know this says townhome and I have maybe an idea about what that means. What I really need to know though, is this a condominium or is this a lot in a subdivision? Is this a unit or a lot? Okay, and that'll determine the type of loan that your buyer can get. Has anybody had experiences with that, where you put in an offer with a client and lo and behold, it turns out we put in an offer and it was a condominium, not a PUD. So they couldn't get the loan anymore. I mean, it happens sometimes. It happens sometimes. So let's look at some of these reservations and conditions on deeds. So we'll see these recorded separately. That's what we've seen so far. You also see them on deeds. So this is a deed from mom and dad to their daughter for a lot next door to their main house. And they reserved the water rights. They reserved an easement. They gave building restrictions. Okay, if you're going to build on this lot next to us, here's what you need to do as far as square footage. Okay, they also reserved a right-of-way going to the creek through their house. Okay, and then they gave her a birthday present, a birthday gift. This is for your birthday. We love you. We hope you'll move back here with your kids and grandkids. So there's all these different things that just show up on this or this deed from mom and dad to daughter. Now, if you're looking at an abstract like I do all the time, it's tempting to just say, okay, here's when daughter came into title from mom and dad. And if we just look at that listing and that entry number, we're not going to see any of these restrictions, are we? We actually have to do the work of reading the deed and understanding what's happening there. Here's another example of one that's up in Valverde here in Bountiful. You can see all these different things are restrictive covenants that they put in there for widening of the road. Okay, they put in a restrictive covenant for a subject to an existing mortgage. They put in here no farming except for residential uses. They say how many hens you can have that lay eggs. They say what type of outbuilding you can have. They tell you what type of structure that you can have. Okay. You can also find these notes on plats. Now, if you've had my plat map class, we've kind of looked at a couple of these, but anytime you see a title commitment that says subject to notes on the official recorded plat, nowadays there'll be a link there that you just click and you can read that official recorded plat. But let's look at some of these notes. So we've got an overhead view. That's the Legacy Event Center there in Farmington, just south of Station Park. So this is kind of in the area of Farmington High School. If you look, here's this little area in yellow off of 11th West. And here's our little subdivision that's right here. Okay, in this subdivision, here's one lot in particular I like to point out. It's got a river or creek that runs right through the back of it. See, it just kind of nicks the corner right there. And, you know, creeks ebb and flow a little bit. But on the title commitment for this one, it said, hey, there's notes on the plat, and then there are CC&Rs. And hopefully the buyer's reviewing both of those things. Like, we can give a buyer all this information, but we can't make them read it, right? The CC&Rs for this subdivision are only 2 pages long. Really, it's about 1 page, because by the time you have all the space for the recording stamp and all the space for the signatures, there's only 8 paragraphs here. And the CC&Rs are pretty simple. There's 8 paragraphs. It says, here's how long they last. You can't further subdivide a lot. This is done under laws of the state of Utah. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. As you look, though, as you review the different plat maps, this is the county plat map from Davis County. That's the ownership plat. And here's the dedicated or the official plat. Okay, so this is the plat map type that goes through the county planning or the city planning and zoning. So this went through Farmington City, right? Before it recorded at Davis County. And if you look at these notes, it says, oh, there's an irrigation waterway. There's an irrigation structure. There's a trail easement across the back of this lot. There's a right of way for a creek that runs through here. All these items that are on this dedicated plat, all these reservations and restrictions. Also, there's this whole little section here that's in like 6-point font that no one can read. But as you zoom in on it, there are a few things here. Now, it says there's a soil report. Is it important to read a soil report before you build? Well, yeah, it probably is. It talks about where the flood maps are, the flood zones are. It says finish grading. All the water that drains on your lot needs to stay within your lot. They don't want it to drain toward the creek. And then suddenly the last 4 paragraphs here, last 3 paragraphs, sorry, they talk about one, dwelling size. That's a building restriction. How big the home has to be. It talks about what type of fence you can have, the siding, the air conditioning, how many vehicles you can have on your lot. Okay, it says your landscaping have to be completed within 1 year within the front yard. So these are things that we usually see on CC&Rs, right? Just the recorded CC&Rs, but we didn't in this case, right? The only place it shows up is on that dedicated plat. Covenants, conditions, restrictions, and reservations can show up there as well, not just on the recorded documents. So all these plat maps are worth reading for buyer due diligence. And it's worth it to get the correct plat map from your title company and from the county recorder's office if you can't get it from the title company. And it is the dedicated or the official plat. That's generally the one you want for subdivided property. Now, keep in mind, there could be properties right next door to this one that have the same reservations and same easements, but because they've never been subdivided or they're not a condominium, they're not going to have a detailed plat like this. They're just not. The county maintains a section, township, and range map, but if it's never been developed or subdivided, even if it has a parcel or a residence or commercial building on it, you're not going to see these notes. You have to seek that information out in other ways. So let's talk about HOAs and CC&Rs. Okay, we're through our about first third of the class, which I think is good news for everybody. Generally, when you have an owners association, it's because there's a common interest of the parties about where they want to live, common facilities or common area. Those are the 3 kind of areas: interest, facilities, and area. That's generally what you look at. Now, in Utah, there's 2 types of owners association. There's the community ownership, and then there's the condominium ownership. And oh, hold on, we got something here in the chat. Oh yeah, those are, Whitney, to answer your statement, there are tons of restrictions that show up on plats that you're not going to see anywhere else. And the only thing a title company does is tell you, hey, there might be something here worth looking at. So it's kind of up to a buyer to look at those things. But if you look at these two areas of law, right, or these 2 laws, you've got one of them is 59 pages, and that's for condos, and the other is 49 pages. So there's about 100 pages here, really, of just acts and rules about having an association group. Okay, so as we run through this a little bit, let's look at the Community Association Act. There it is. Says, hey, a common area means something that the association owns, maintains, or repairs. And it kind of goes into those specifics. Okay, common area owns, maintains, repairs. It could be all these different things: pumps, motors, foundation, walls, all these different things for a community. Okay, for a condominium act and the community association, it talks about, hey, if you don't pay your association dues, the association can foreclose on you through a non-judicial means. Okay, they can foreclose on you through the courts, or they can foreclose on you through a trustee's deed notice of default. If you want one of your associations to be official, there's a couple things you need to do. One of them is to record your CC&Rs and bylaws within 90 days after recording your plat. And usually those 2 things are recorded together. And then there's registration with the Department of Commerce. And there's two areas where you register your HOA. One of them is through the business entity section. Same thing with like if you've done a partnership or an LLC or a corporation, you need to register there as a nonprofit. And then also you need to register on the HOA registry. We'll look at the HOA registry here in just a second. If you don't register within 90 days, technically you don't have an HOA if you haven't done your registration. Okay, so let's look. I'm going to share my screen again. let's look at how this kind of works a little bit. And I always love it when I screen share because at the top of my page where I need to get to the ribbon, I can't see the ribbon, so that's fun. So here's our Utah HOA registry, right? If you've seen this before, to register a new association, this is where you do it. And to look for other HOA that are registered, this is how you can do it there as well. So let's pretend that I lead an HOA and it has Summit in the name, maybe Summit Creek Owners Association or something like that. If I type in Summit to the HOA registry page, it's going to make me re-register. Thank you, because it's sitting there too long. Okay, here are all the HOAs that are registered in Utah with Summit in the name. If I want this one, Summit at Ski Lake Gated Community, boy, that sounds exclusive. If I click here, it's going to tell me, here's the chair of the association. Okay, here's the manager, and here's the primary contact. So it looks like this one is, they all have @HOA in their Gmail. It looks like this one's from an association, right? Or from a management company. But this might be a quick way for you to figure out, okay, where am I supposed to go to find out information about this HOA, especially if your seller doesn't know? I don't know, it just comes out of my bank account. The HOA registry might be a place where you can find that information fairly quickly. And you know, it'll be on your handout that is on the website that I sent over. Also, if you just Google Utah HOA registry, that's where it shows up, right? It'll be there. So let me quickly share my screen again. Sorry for the folks on the call here. Let's see. So yeah, you're going to register with the Department of Commerce in those 2 spaces. Now let's get into some specific rules. How many of you have ever read CC&Rs that says, oh no, in order to change any rule in this association, you need 80 or 90% of the people to agree? Okay, that might say that within the HOA documents. Our state code doesn't say that though. Our state code says 67% is the maximum amount of people that you need to have in order to change an HOA rule. So if your CC&Rs or your bylaws say no 90%, no, it's only 67%. Okay. Let's look at our real estate purchase contract real quick and look at some things that seller disclosures. Okay, so when a seller's disclosing about HOAs and CC&Rs, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to fill out that written property disclosure. Okay, and here's our written property disclosure. And remember that, you know, this form, I think it's Form 10, right? Form 9, I think. It's going to tell you, okay, do you know any problems with boundary lines or easements, anything affecting the property? But that's pretty much it. Okay, it's not going to tell you a few things that a buyer needs to know. Okay, it'll talk about boundary lines and encroachment, but guess what it doesn't talk about? It doesn't talk about 2 things that are in our state code. When it comes to HOAs and CC&Rs, we're all used to just sending the CC&Rs and the bylaws if they're recorded. And hopefully the seller can get a hold of the financials, right? The HOA financials. Part of governing documents of any HOA or CA include the articles of incorporation, the bylaws, the CC&Rs, the rules, and the plat. So in Utah, the plat, that plat that we were looking at, the recorded plat, is part of HOA governing documents. And they're required to be sent from a seller to a buyer. So if you haven't been sending a plat map with all this other HOA mumbo jumbo, and by the way, your documents as real estate agent don't say include the plat, technically your seller has not been doing what's required, right? Now, title companies, when they hyperlink a title commitment, they're going to hopefully link to the correct plat, right? That's what they should be doing. But again, a plat and those articles of incorporation for the HOA are part of governing documents. Okay. How many of you knew that already? The plat was a governing document. The articles of incorporation for your HOA was a governing document. Yeah, all those things are. Isn't that fun? Okay, try not to think about that because we're just going to do this starting today. We're gonna do better. Let's look at HOA liens and foreclosure. It used to be to foreclose on an HOA lien. it took you over a year. So here's our simplified court process to foreclose on a mortgage and also an HOA lien. They're a lot the same. There's a sheriff that conducts the sale, and then title's conveyed by a sheriff's deed, and following the sheriff's deed, there's a 180-day redemption period. So by the time you start your lawsuit as an HOA, you finally get through the court case, you have your auction at day 180-ish, you've got another 180 days until you can sell the property. That's a long time. That's about a year to foreclose on something. During that second 180-day period, that redemption period, the title's not marketable because the junior lien holder or anyone who has an interest in the property or the former owner can redeem the property and purchase it back for the sales price at the auction. So it's not really a great thing for an HOA to have to foreclose judicially. So our enforcement of lien statute for both the COA and the HOA statute changed. It says, okay, you can do this non-judicially now. That means they can foreclose the same way that a trustee can foreclose. Okay, if they appoint a trustee and record a notice of default, that timeline goes from 180 days before the sale to 120 days. It cuts down by a third. Also, after a trustee sale, there is no redemption period. So if you've been following the notice of default list, if you're one of those agents that likes to look at it to see what's going on, you've probably noticed that, you know, a half to a third sometimes of all the notice of defaults that show up on the property, well, they're HOA defaults. Now, as a real estate investor, you can buy property, you know, at a trustee's sale, and sometimes it might make sense to purchase the lien position of an HOA lien, but most of the time it doesn't. Okay, you're generally not the first mortgage or the first lien. You're probably falling under lien position. So the way to get through this is you have to read the notice of default and see what's in default. You can also look at the trustee who's conducting the sale. Generally, the normal trustees you're used to seeing, like Halliday and Watkins or James Woodall, Orange County Title, all these different things, all these different trustees, they don't foreclose on HOA liens, but the smaller attorney firms will, like the Bruce Jenkins and things like that. So yeah, read the notice of default and look at it. But basically for HOAs, and I've heard tell that timeshare HOAs are the same way, given the fact they can now foreclose non-judicially, is saving these HOAs a ton of money and a ton of time in recouping costs from delinquencies, which is probably good. Okay. So we're halfway done, I think, ish with the class. So that's great. That's great. Let's talk about fair housing. Okay, 1968, fair housing came into being, and thank goodness for it, right? It became the law in 1969. So let's all, before we get into this next section, because we're going to talk about race restrictions. So one of the jobs I have at Backman is to make sure that all of our stuff is client friendly. So we looked at that database of 5,200 subdivisions and all their CC&Rs. I had to make sure that that database was clean and we didn't have any personal client information in that database. Because sometimes when you save a document, you just save it to the wrong spot. You guys have probably all done that before, right? So I went through the 5,200 files and I started reading CC&Rs, which is great. If you think about it, 5,200, and if there's 3 amendments, you don't want to know how much CC&Rs I read, but it was a lot. Let's look at race restrictions. So this is an old deed. We've looked at this before in a few classes, I think, or some of you had. This is a deed for a parcel. It's not a lot in a subdivision. Okay, it says, okay, hey, these are restrictive covenants, mean you can't have anything closer than 24 feet from the street line. There can be nothing under 650 square feet, and no person of any race other than the white race shall use or occupy the lot unless you're a house servant. Okay, so this is from 1947. This is an illegal and wrong race restriction, right? And fair housing said this race restriction is not enforceable. You can't do anything with it. Is it still there, though? Is it still on this recorded deed? You can't go back in time and unrecord a deed. It's still kind of there. These are all race restrictions that just appeared within CC&Rs, like for subdivided properties. So entire sections of Ogden, of Provo, of Salt Lake, here in Davis County, of certain cities have these race restrictions recorded. They all pretty much say the same thing. No person of any race other than the white race. Here's another page of the same thing. Okay. Unless you're a domestic servant. So as I went through here, I put up 8 examples. Most of them are from the 40s. Also, although some of them still go into the 50s and even the 60s. Utah didn't have a fair housing law until the act passed in 1969, or went into law in 1969. Now, some subdivisions, after they noticed, they went in, or some HOAs, I should say, they went into the county and recorded a specific release of this race restriction. So on the right-hand side, this is a document reported in 1995, right? Says, hey, this race restriction no longer applies to our subdivision. Now, it didn't apply before because of the Fair Housing Act. But, you know, these people here in Weber County felt, hey, we don't want people to feel that way. Our legislature actually passed a law a couple of years ago. It was HB 347 that says, if you find a race restriction on your property or within your subdivision or HOA, you can go to the county and record a release for the entire subdivision or for your individual lot if you want to. And when you hand it to the recorder's office, you don't have to pay for it. It's free. So again, these original words on the CC&Rs aren't going away, but there is a way to have an amendment recorded for free to specifically release those race restrictions, right? So there's been a couple times where I've had an agent call, and you know, I know the people that they're showing the homes to, and they're not white, and they're looking at moving someplace in Ogden where I know there's a race restriction. I've had conversations with agents before saying, hey, I'm sending the CC&Rs out. They have this race restriction. If they're reading the CC&Rs and have a concern, fair housing knocked them out. Yeah, that's something that we should know about, right? Okay, any questions about race restrictions? I think I've probably beat that horse enough. Okay, let's look at CC&R expirations, because some of them do expire and some don't. So these CC&Rs said unless they're extended, they're off in 10 years. The next one said 20 years. And some of them actually say 30 years, and some say that, hey, this is just going to be a restriction for as long as these properties exist, as long as this subdivision exists. Okay. If you're a member of an HOA because of the CC&Rs, there's actually another thing that's required for a seller to send a buyer that nobody really knows about. How many of you have ever heard of the Utah HOA Bill of Rights? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen again. It's our code says that if you're selling a property that has an HOA, you have to share the HOA Bill of Rights with the new buyer. Okay, so I'm going to get back on our on my Chrome here, and hopefully I'll be able to find this. I really just want this screen part to go away. There we go. Here's our HOA Bill of Rights. Okay, it says, what are my rights of a homeowner as an HOA member or COA member? Okay, it talks about rental restrictions, when those are valid and when those are not valid. It talks about only having to pay your proportional share of expenses. It talks about these questions about what is required for me to send as a seller to a new buyer. Yeah, Eric, go ahead.
Did you say this is required that we send this?
It is required. It's part of our code.
What?
It's not on any of our, it's not on the seller disclosures. It's not on the rep sheet. It is buried within our Utah code. No one knows about it.
Do you know where that's at in the code?
Yeah, actually it says it right at the very beginning. Utah code 578A227. It's kind of right here.
So is it on request or is it just required?
It's just required. It's a must thing, not a may thing.
Yeah, I'm gonna write that down real quick.
Well, it's also on a handout, Eric,
Okay,
like the specific Bill of Rights and the website to get here. It's all there. I asked Backman and our underwriter, actually, Backman asked our underwriters, put it that way. Can we just put a link to this on our title commitments? That way, if you're sending it out as a listing agent, you've already met the requirement, right, of sending it to your buyer, right? Technically, you've met that requirement. And they said no. Because we don't want to be liable if the link changes or the information changes from. So I think it's kind of a cop-out answer. However, when you send me a request for CC&Rs, guess what I send to you? A link to this website. Hopefully that gets forwarded along to your new buyers. And again, no one's ever heard of this, right? Let's go through it real quick. So let me reshare my screen. I probably don't need to announce that I'm going to reshare my screen every time, guys. It's just helping keep things straight in my head. So yeah, sorry about that. But let's look at a couple of these rules. You can't interfere with the freedom of an owner to determine the composition of your family. Now, that sounds like something that should be obvious, right? But do some CC&Rs tell you who can live there and who can't? You can't require more than a super majority vote. If you're a shared structure, you can sell your individual unit. Even if your CC&Rs have a restriction about how many units can be rented, if you're a member of the military, or you rent to a parent, child, or sibling, or you're relocated for a year or 2 years or less, they can't stop you from renting your unit. All this is in that HOA Bill of Rights. Okay. The reserve fund has to be there. You have to be able to approve the annual budget and see it. You can't be charged more than $500 a month in aggregate for total fines. They can't stop you from displaying political signs within your unit. Can they stop you from putting them in your yard? Yeah. Can they stop you from putting them in your window? No. No, they can't do that. Okay, a payment in subsection 1, meaning your proportional share, is an assessment against every lot. You can't pay more than your ownership interest. If there's 100 units, you only pay 1%. They can't stop you from displaying the American flag. Okay, all this is in that. So here we go, Eric. Here's our section. It's 58.7A 105.1. And then the other one is 58.8. I think I can't see because your beautiful faces are in the way. 58.8 6.1. Before the sale of any lot, the grantor shall provide the association's governing documents, and it says a link or other access point to the department's education materials. That's what we just looked at, that HOA Bill of Rights. Okay. Now this is interesting because think of how many HOAs are violating this rule. Unless specifically authorized, an association may not charge a fee for providing association payoff information. You can't charge a fee to access this in excess of $50. So how many of you have ever tried to get HOA fees before, and the HOA management company says, yeah, it's $130 to get the payoff early. An association doesn't give you the request within 3 business days after closing agent or title company requests it, cannot file a lien against the unit because they took too long in getting us the information. Isn't that interesting? Okay. Any questions about HOA Bill of Rights or anything like that as we move forward? It's worth your time if you're a member of an HOA or COA, or just as an agent representing a buyer, it's worth your time to read through that HOA Bill of Rights and know what's there. Know what's required and what they're allowed to charge you for and what they're not allowed to charge you for. Okay, this is the tail end of class. We're going to look at CC&R examples. So this is what comes of Tucker reading 15,000 entries of CC&Rs. I call this the fun part because, man, there's some wacky stuff in here. Okay, here we go. We're going to start out in 1946. Luckily, this is not a race restriction. This is more fun than that. So I figured out that you can go and you can look on there's a website that you can go to figure out what the newspaper headlines were the day you were born or any date. And in Salt Lake, the Salt Lake Tribune has a site, or the state of Utah has one that says, okay, here's the specific day. So the day this subdivision recorded in 1946, here was the front page of the Salt Lake Tribune. It talks about nuclear bomb testing over the Bikini Atoll, right? And if you know, Jake, I think you must know because you've got that tropical environment behind you, right? SpongeBob SquarePants is from Bikini Bottom. Why? Because that's where the nuclear bombs were tested. That's why Patrick and SpongeBob came to life, apparently. Well, it was radiation. Okay, so here's our date. Okay. North Canyon Heights subdivision records there. Isn't that a cute little subdivision? It has 1 page of CC&Rs. That's it. If you look at the CCRs, though, from August 1946, it says, okay, your dwelling has to cost at least $4 grand. Can you imagine buying a house for $4,000? And then it says no structure of a temporary basis should be used as a residence except during the present housing shortage. So why was there a housing shortage in 1946? Well, building materials were hard to come by because we were transitioning from a war economy back to a civilian economy. So, you know, things that used to make bathtubs were turned into things that could make tanks, I suppose, or airplanes. So during that time, there was not enough places to store everybody. So in this subdivision, they said, okay, we recognize that you can put someone up in a temporary residence during this housing shortage. Isn't that kind of interesting? This one, I liked it. It says, it reminded me of Back to the Future a little bit. If you're going to have anything wood, it has to have at least 2 coats of paint, right? Don't forget that second coat, Biff. Just do 2 coats on there. Here's one that says, for this specific lot, the maximum height of the building is 23 feet. So here's a subdivision plat, right? You can see kind of lot 10 that's right here. Okay, there's lot 10. Everywhere else is going to be higher than 23 feet, but they are not. So this is along 9th East. Okay, right next to a grocery store. It's a little headstone company. Okay, they needed it under 23 feet so that you could see the commercial buildings behind it. Isn't that interesting? And it looks to me like the headstone business is doing just fine when the Google truck walked by. People are still dying and they still need monuments. So that's probably a good thing. Here's another one. This is for Alpine Country Club subdivision down in Utah County. Now, if you live in Alpine Country Club subdivision, I think back in the day, that must have meant that your daddy or your mommy was doing pretty good job-wise. Here's the subdivision plat, okay, along Country Club Drive. As you can imagine, Country Club Drive, it borders a golf course. You can kind of see it there on the south side on the bottom of this picture. That's Country Club Drive. Okay, here it is from Google Earth. You can kind of see it in 3D. Look at those beautiful fairways, right? And then the house is back right up to the golf course. Now, behind the homes, what do you notice? There's a lot of mature trees there, right? Big trees, bushes. There's almost this border between the houses and the golf course, which makes sense, right? If you're going to live along a golf course, you probably don't want to be beaten by a golf ball when you're mowing the lawn. Okay, so here's a few things that show up in these CC&Rs. The first thing says you've got to keep your house the original color the builder had for you. Does anybody, do you think, change their exterior? Are they all the original? Okay. The next one is even more funny. It says landscaping shall not be planted to obstruct the view of the golf course of adjacent lots. All right. Going back to our picture, does anything obstruct the view of adjacent lots on the back of these things? So my plan is to just come with a chainsaw and cut down all the trees in that whole subdivision and say, well, y'all were in violation of the CC&R, so I just fixed it for you. Okay, probably not, but you know, in theory, I guess these folks are all violating the CC&Rs. My buddy Roger purchased this property over 20 years ago now. He bought a property in West Park Village subdivision. Okay, so here are the CC&Rs on the plat map. Let's look at West Park. This is in that part of Davis County that you never really know where you are. Is this Layton? Is this Clinton? Is this Clearfield? You guys know kind of that area where the power lines go through? All right, so here's West Park Village. Okay, he bought one of these lots, brand new home, and there's this lot A, lot B, and lot C information. It's where the power lines go. So here it is on the overhead map. You can kind of see it right there, right? Here it is on Backman's, on our old plat. Our title searcher just said, oh, here's where the easement runs for the power line. And there it is from the street view. So my buddy Roger's buying this property, and he says, hey, I'm buying this property. I said, oh, cool, I can do your closing. He says, no, we've got to close through the builder's title company. And I was like, wah, wah, wah. You know, you get that. So I said, oh, okay, well, let me look at it. So I looked at the plat map. I said, hey, it looks like you guys have common area. Do you have an HOA here? He says, no HOA. I said, well, what about where the power lines are? He says, oh, it's great. The builder's going to put in grass and our kids can play there, you know, do football or soccer, whatever they want there. I said, well, what about maintenance? He says, oh, the builder's going to take care of it. I said, you need to ask because I think you're going to have maintenance fees for that. He said, oh, no maintenance fees. And at that point, I just kind of dropped it because I don't want it's not my circus, not my monkeys kind of thing. I did read the CC&Rs though, where it talked about what? An owner's assessment and management of an HOA. Right there it is. It's right in the CC&Rs that were recorded right after the plat. So he moves in, and not 3 months later, I get a phone call from him, and he says, "Hey, I just got a bill for an HOA. What's this about?" I'm like, "Well, you have an HOA." Anyway, common area. The builder's not going to pay for maintenance of that common area, are they? They're not going to continue to pay a fee over the next 30, 40, or 50 years to maintain that. It is going to be maintained. Here's another one. This is a PUD. This is one of my favorite stories. This is up in Layton. Okay, East Layton, just off of Highway 89. Mountain Hollow Homeowners Association. Okay, beautiful homes, great area, mature trees. I love it. CCR's recorded March 4th, 1986. Okay. Here's the area. I've outlined it in yellow of this HOA. Lots of homes there, right? Here's the fun thing. The CCRs run for 20 years and they may be renewed. Does it say they will? No, it says they may be renewed. Also, it says in the CC&Rs, there's maintenance fees to reconstruct, replace, and refinish any paved area, any paved street area. So are these publicly dedicated roads that the city owns? No. These are private roads maintained by an HOA. Now, here's what happened. You fast forward 20 years, you go from 86, 96, 2006, and the HOA ceased to operate. And what happens with pavement after 20 years? Okay, so the owners of this area, and this is 8 years later, the owners of this area get together and they say, hey, we need to assess for repaving these streets for asphalt repair. And some of the members of the former association said, well, no, you can't assess my house. We don't have an HOA and you can't force me to pay. So what do you do in that situation? The owners in the subdivision some of the owners in the subdivision went to Layton City and said, hey, can you help us repave the roads? And Layton City said, no, these are private. And they said, well, it's a safety factor. So what Layton City did is they came up with a settlement agreement. They said, okay, we're going to repair these roads for you, and we're going to tax you for repairs of these roads. They're still not public roads. They're public roads. Sorry, they're still not public roads. They're private roads, but we need to do this for safety reasons. Isn't that great? So do CC&Rs expire? Can HOAs just cease to exist? Yeah, sometimes they can. Okay, this is for Almond Heights subdivision, kind of a bigger subdivision, right? This is up in Washington County. Okay, it says no dome structures, no prefab homes. Can you have your tiny house on these lots? No manufactured housing. Here's another one for Fair Grove. This is an adult community. Okay, here it is in Weber County. Now, these are my favorite CC&Rs ever because in 20 years, when I'm even more ornery than I am now, I'm going to write CCRs just like this. So here we are, Weber County, just looking east, right? Beautiful homes, right? Mostly brick, some stucco. Are they big? Yeah, these are big lots, big homes. Okay, here's what it says. Okay, you've got to have at least one person 50 years of age, no one under 18. No more than 2 people per dwelling, unless they're related by blood or marriage, and then only 4 people. So let me get this straight. In these large homes, the maximum number of people that can live there are 4. And at least one of them has to be above 50 and no one under the age of 18. Okay. No more than 2 okay. This talks about animals. If you have any animal and they're outside your house, they have to be on a leash at all times. That includes in your backyard. You can't have a kennel or dog run. You can't have anything that's dangerous, fierce, or vicious, or an annoyance. Now, what constitutes an annoyance? No one.
The donkey that we own, he's an annoyance, I guarantee it.
Oh yeah, probably so. Go ahead, Eric. Oh, I think you're on mute, Eric.
Yeah, when they've got the HOAs that say these things, and then the state comes out and says you can't restrict people from having an ADU in their own home, who wins?
Generally, the state does, because in all these CC&Rs, there has to be someone who's willing to enforce. So a lot of these are paper tigers, right? If no one's going to enforce it, then you're probably going to be just fine.
Okay.
Yeah, this guy kind of went on.
Probably win because now you have a state law backing you up.
Yeah,
At least as
exactly.
far as that habitation there. Okay.
Now look at these CC&Rs as they move on though. No annoying sounds, no annoying lights, no dust. Don't create dust. Don't be offensive. Only vinyl fence you can have. Only fencing you can have is beige or tan vinyl fencing. Nothing cedar, no cedar posts. Everything has to be approved by the design committee. Your garbage cans have to be stored in your garage. They cannot be stored anywhere else. They have to be stored in your garage unless it's trash day. Don't accommodate travelers. TV antennas in the attic. No clotheslines, no camping. So you can't put up a tent overnight or anything like that. Vehicles have to stay in the garage. You can't keep a vehicle on your driveway. In the garage only. Anything you do subsequently to your house or your lot has to be approved by the Architectural Control Committee. It talks about penalty for failure to talk about for the design committee. Okay, you've got to give them 10 days of written notice, and they can fine you a minimum of $2,000. Now, here's the thing. Our state code, our homeowner bill of rights say the maximum fine is what? $500 per month for all violations. So is this technically in keeping with that HOA bill of rights? No, it's not. It's not. Roofing materials. Okay, commencement of construction, how long you have to finish your home. Okay, no metal sheds, accessory building height restrictions. And these, now this is my favorite part. How long do these CC&Rs last? Until the expiration of 21 years after the death of the now living survivor of the descendants of George W. Bush, president at the time. So how long do these CC&Rs last? Well, George Bush had twins, right? I can't remember their names, Jenna and somebody. These don't expire until 21 years after the last living twin's death. I think that's kind of awesome, right? How long? A lot of people don't know when their CC&Rs are going to expire. I mean, I think with an actuary table or two, you might be able to figure this one out within a pretty good degree of consistency. But yeah, that's what these CC&Rs say.
I think it's Jenna and Hoda.
Jenna and Hoda. Okay. I'm gonna take your word for that one, Brad. Yeah, I don't know for sure. So this is Palo Verde. This is a mobile home park. You actually own the lot for your mobile home, not a mobile home park, but it's a mobile home subdivision. This is Palo Verde in St. George or Washington County. Look at how beautiful that is, right? Okay, only adults, no one under 16. Children cannot play on the street or loiter, and the subdivision miles per hour is 15. That's your maximum speed limit. No annoying sounds, no annoying noises, no loud parties. Okay, isn't that great? So you can live here in Palo Verde, but you can't have any fun. I think that's the bottom line. This is another Garden Park East subdivision. Okay, isn't this great? Okay, this is beautiful. There's Garden Park East subdivision. Now, if you look at those look like condos to me, right? I mean, shared walls, shared roof. They look like condos, but guess what? It's not a condo, it's a subdivision. And the units, sorry, the lots, the buildings have shared walls. When you read the CC&Rs, there's things about easements for party walls for abutting owners. And it says, hey, if you need to install utility, you can go, it says above, across, under, and through the roofs and exterior walls of your building mates. So it's all part of a party wall agreement. Here are alpha townhomes. Now this says townhomes, right? Okay, alpha townhomes. Now we know that townhomes basically is meaningless. So a townhome can be a subdivision, it can be a condominium, or it can be a PUD, PRUD. So here's our alpha homes, okay, townhomes. Look at it, you can tell it's Washington County because they all have tiled roofs, right? That's kind of how things work. And it talks about, again, a party wall agreement between the owners. Important to know that if you're a buyer and you're moving in, that there's a party wall agreement. Yeah, it probably is. Okay, here's another one. This is Northern Hills. So this is classic Bountiful, Utah subdivision. Northern Hills has been around for a long, long time. Okay, I love this one because here's Northern Hills. Okay, it's up on the hill in Bountiful, beautiful, right? It says, one, you've got to keep track of slope erosion. And then two, it says, if you're going to mend these CC&Rs, you need 75% of the other owners to agree with you. Now, it says 75%. Do you need 75% now? No, you only need 67%. That's what our homeowner bill of rights says. It says they run for 20 years. Okay, so are these even valid anymore? Probably not, So here's another one, Eaglewood subdivision. Now, when I was in high school, Eaglewood kind of started to get built a little bit. If you lived in Eaglewood, that was the place to be, baby. Eaglewood, brand new homes up on the mountain surrounding a beautiful golf course. Here's Eaglewood Estates. Okay, this is this area of the subdivision right here. You can kind of see it looking kind of north to south here, or south to north, excuse me. In Eaglewood, there's a stray ball easement. If you are in one of these subdivisions that borders the golf course, they all kind of read the same. It says, okay, if a golfer is golfing and they hit a ball into your lot, they have the right to go in and retrieve their ball. And it's not just for golf course adjacent lots. They made it apply to every lot in the subdivision. So I've got a friend who owns a mortgage company. He lives up here off of Tanglewood a little bit. I called him on the phone. I said, hey, did you know in your CC&Rs, there's this stray ball easement? So if I drop a golf ball on your lot, I can just go peek in your windows anytime I want to. And he's like, you can't do that. I said, well, you've seen me golf. You know it's entirely possible for me to hit a ball 400 feet out of bounds. It's entirely possible. All right. The thing about this stray ball easement is it's not reciprocal. So a golfer can enter your lot, but you cannot enter the golf course. So in theory, if your kid's playing basketball in the backyard of their lot in Eaglewood, if the ball rolls onto the fairway, can the kid go get it? No, but can a golfer go retrieve a golf ball from their basketball court? Yeah. Also, there's an indemnification. We're going to see this over and over again with golf courses. So speaking of golf courses, this is Sun River down in St. George. Okay, I love this on the Google Street View because it has a golf cart or two of them that are on the road. In this subdivision, it says, hey, this is what a golf cart means. A golf cart is not the same thing as a razor, right? And it talks about within the CC&Rs, there's a little map of where you're allowed to drive your golf cart and where you're not. So they have golf cart restrictions. I love it. I love that about Sun River. This is Copper Rock Golf Course. Okay, another one that's in Washington County. Okay. You can tell it's Washington County right by the overhead view because you've got desert with no water and then a really thirsty golf green in that area. It's probably fine. Don't worry about it. On the subdivision plat, it actually has a note that says, hey, if you or a guest is struck by a golf ball, you can't hold the developer or the golf course responsible. And it repeats that statement within their CC&Rs. Right, so all about golf. I think developers are getting, and golf courses are getting smarter about what happens if somebody gets hit with a golf ball. This is called Golf Course Island Subdivision. Isn't that great? This is out in my favorite little place. This is oh shoot, Stansbury Park. Right? So we used to drive out to the West Desert. I don't know why. We would do it a few times a year with my parents to go, shoot the guns and things like that. We go out to Tooele County and just drive out to like Black's Ranch or the Pony Express Trail or Topaz Mountain, something like that. And we'd always drive through Stansbury Park. And I always had a dream there of living there because in Stansbury Park, you could have a lot that has a dock. They got those ponds there next to the golf course. So there's golf course lots and there's pond lots, and you can have your own dock. And within the CC&Rs, it says, hey, if you have a waterfront lot, here's the restriction about how big your boat dock can be. Isn't that cool? Super cool. And then the restrictions about whether or not you have a golf course lot. Okay. This is Alta Hills subdivision. Okay, this is in Salt Lake County. Isn't that a great little neighborhood? Looks a lot like my neighborhood in Kaysville. Okay. I love this one. It has an architectural control committee of one person. Now, I'm not sure how one person can be a committee. Is that even technically possible to have a one-person committee? So they changed it. He's no longer the sole member of the committee, of the architectural control committee. He assigned it to another one person. So now it's still a one-person committee. But they had this document signed, a transfer of control of the architectural control committee. I just think that's funny to have a committee of one person. This is Last Chance Ski Ranch. Now, when I think ski ranch, I'm thinking like Alta, Snowbird, Deer Valley, Snow Basin. This is out in Tooele County. Did anybody know there was a ski ranch in Tooele County? This is actually a water ski ranch. So here we are in Tooele County. There's the Last Chance Ski Ranch. Okay. You see they have the little turnaround sections. So when you're water skiing, there's a place to turn around. In Texas and other places, they'll have these that have their own built-in wave making equipment. Okay. If you live in Last Chance Ski Ranch within the CC&Rs, there's an indemnity about the lake. Says, hey, if you're living here, you're an owner of the lake, and also you're responsible for the safety of yourselves, the residents, and any guests. You can't hold the HOA responsible if somebody drowns in the lake, right? Okay, so we're gonna jump back in time. I think this might be our last example, which is probably pretty good because, man, I'm getting tired. Okay. This is from Wikipedia. This is a photo of the East Layton City Hall. Did anybody know there was an East Layton City? I had no idea. So in Wikipedia, it says East Layton City existed for only about 9 years, right? 9 years of East Layton City from, let's see, 72 to 81. And then it merged with Layton City. So within that short little time period, there's a subdivision called Heather Hills that was recorded, right? And it was approved by the East Layton City engineer and approved by the East Layton City by the acting mayor. Okay, in the CCRs for this little Heather Glen subdivision, it says there's slope control easements, and you've got to be careful about the flow of water and drainage canals. Talks about slope and erosion control. So I've got this map up. I apologize. The overhead is kind of old, but you can see on the north end, on the very top of this map, this is from the 90s. You can see there's homes built on this slope along Heather Drive, just north of Heather Drive or above it. Okay, this is the overhead map. I've got one of the lots highlighted here. Okay, do you see any homes there now? Okay, tons of homes, no homes. So what happened? Okay, here it is looking north to south, looking at that hillside. There's no homes there, right? Couple trees, but that's it. Here it is looking east to west. You can kind of see the hill a little bit better in that little area. Okay, this is from a geologic report about 6 homes that were damaged in Layton. Okay. It says starting in 1997 and 98, there was above average precipitation, above average rain and snowfall. If you remember, back then, that's the year that Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines blew up, and it put a whole bunch of ash into the atmosphere, and we had much higher winter that year. I can remember it because I was shoveling snow at that time, and that was a lot of snow to shovel. And there was a landslide that damaged 6 homes. So let's look at the report. Here is from the report. This is a picture on August 8th, 2001. Okay. Here's a picture, same area, looking the same direction, just 2 weeks later. You notice what happened? You can kind of see the ground starting to give way, and then the whole subdivision slid off of the mountain. Okay, here's a picture of one of the homes as it slid. It was mid-slide. Now, I remember this because my wife and I had been married a couple years. We took a walk. This is about a half mile from the home where she grew up in. We took a walk from her parents' house, and you could watch this landslide just moving, and you could hear windows breaking in all the homes, and you can hear nails popping within the walls. It was just crazy. Have we had any homes slide off the mountain here in the last year or so? How about all the homes down in Draper?
Yeah, just with all that flooding.
With all the flooding. So it's kind of an interesting thing, right? There can be this property that's safe, and these homes can exist here for 5, 6, 7 years and not have a problem. But suddenly, when there's an abundance of water, what happens? Things just slide down. Okay, so here's a bunch of pictures from that same report. Right? Kind of interesting to see these pictures as they go and which direction everything flows down toward. So Layton City on lots 11 through 17 recorded this notice that says, hey, for any properties here, in order to build on these in the future, at the very minimum, you need a geotech report, and you have to adjust the stability of the soil before we'll give you a building permit. So does anybody want to buy one of these lots and build here? Guess what? These lots showed up on the MLS, or 3 of these lots showed up on the MLS just last year as buildable lots. Now, here's the thing. Who's responsible for these homes sliding down the mountain? Who do you sue? In other words, if you're a home buyer or the homeowner, can you sue the city in this case? East Layton City does not exist anymore. How about the builder? The builder's long gone. Long gone. How about the people who did the geotech report? I'm not sure that back in 1978 that was even required. Now, somebody knew that there might be slope control problems, right? Somebody knew that. But was it communicated clearly to the people who bought those lots? I don't know. I don't know. When you see an annotation on a plat or subdivision plat that says geotech report, you should probably read it. If there's any questions about where these properties are, and if there's been problems in the past, you should probably read it. Because we have properties sliding off the mountain. There's some in Morgan County that I know about. Obviously, the ones that are in Draper. There have been homes in Bountiful that have slid. There's a home in Farmington up on the mountain that started to slide here recently. Just east of Lagoon a little bit. All these things, these geotech reports you should know about. Cedar City is famous for having homes that sink. How about the area of Woods Cross? Have you heard about the area in Woods Cross? There's a whole RDA there for homes that have sunk because the water table has shrunk. Eric, did you have a comment?
We had an instance when I took over as principal broker where 2 agents had been sued down in the Cedar City area for geological conditions. And the argument was local agents knew about it, but these agents were from up north, and their real estate license allows them to work anywhere in the state. But and so I was asked as a, no, that one I wasn't an expert witness. It was part of a, you know, they sued everybody. They sued both agents, title companies, lenders, everybody involved was sued. And I think there were 7 or 8 attorneys on that call that were taking depositions all week long. And so even though we won, you don't win when you have attorneys on a call all day long, every day for an entire week straight, you know, and that's just what we see, all the background work. So tens of thousands of dollars. So I tell agents now that if you're down there, you know, if you're working a subdivision or you know, sometimes agents up here want to go down there just helping their friend or their family member close a quick deal. And they're like, hey, I'm willing to make the drive. Yeah, but you don't know it. And so even if you can win, because yes, we are not required to be experts in every area. There are disclosures, you know, there's due diligence expected. We don't want to get wrapped up in a lawsuit because you wanted to drive 5 hours outside of your area of expertise to make a quick buck. You know, refer it to one of our agents that are down there that do understand these water rights issues. And they know them so well. Our agents down there are incredible with the water rights stuff and the land issues. They know these things. And I'm constantly telling my agents, you know, refer it out if you can. So
Yeah, better get a referral fee than be caught in a lawsuit, right? That's part of it.
You get a referral fee. You're taking care of your friend or family member better than if you were involved, because these people know the rules down there.
I know of a real estate investor who bought one of these properties down in Cedar City from a trustee sale, right? It was going to be a quick fix and flip. Well, when they got into it, they discovered the home had sunk and was sinking because, you know, you don't have an inspection or anything like that when you're buying from a trustee sale. And they ended up having to hold the property for over 3 years and to put in helical piers before they could sell it. And they almost broke even.
Yeah,
They lost money on the deal. Luckily, they had a renter who was willing to live under those conditions while they did the helical piers and shored up the foundation. But yeah, there's a lot of these issues that are like that.
and to be clear, we don't have to be the experts, you know, since we're recording this training here, we don't have to be the experts in all of these things. But if your family member buys that home and their home falls off a cliff, and you know, you could have referred it to somebody that knew better. I mean, maybe you do win the lawsuit. You know, maybe you do win because you didn't have to be the expert, but you could have done a better job by having somebody local that really knew what you're dealing with. So,
oh, for sure. So yeah, let's talk about CC&Rs and due diligence. So these are from our REPC, right? It says, okay, change of ownership fees with your HOA. Copy of now notice it says restrictive covenants, restrictions, and then it says financial information. So there's a gap on our REPC about what's required based off of what's on the state code, right? Does it say anything about that website for the HOA Bill of Rights there? No. Is it still required? Yes. Does it say anything about the plat map? No. Is it still required? Yes. Does it say anything about the business entity search or the business entity information for the HOA? No. Is it still required? Yes. Yes. Same thing with our Form 10. So this is the seller telling the buyer what they know. Only what they know. Does it mention those 3 things that we just talked about? Entity, plat map, anything like that? No. Is it still required? Yeah. Yeah, it is. Title issues HOA. I love that on the buyer due diligence form, it combines those two things into one. It just makes me feel like the little, forgotten child sometimes. I'm gonna get over it, but yeah, that's how it feels sometimes. Okay, it talks about the title commitment. It says CC&Rs. It says you're advised to consult directly regarding HOA and HOA matters. And it says, okay, here's some things you need to look at. Notice what it doesn't say. It says proposed budgets, financial statements, proposed assessments, dues, reservations, accounts, rules, meetings, minutes. Does it say those other three things that we talked about? No. Is it required? Well, it should be. There's a gap in our forms, I guess, when it comes to this stuff. So here's a few helpful hints when we're talking about HOAs and CC&Rs. CCRs are usually about these things: architectural control, building restrictions, restrictions about parkings, pets, garbage cans, rental restrictions, easements, party wall agreements. Okay, and they're also found on a plat. Okay, so all this is on the website that I'll point you to in the chat here in a minute or two again. Okay, bylaws are about your rights as an owner in that association, as an owner in the COA or HOA. About what a quorum means, about the structure of your board, about your rules and responsibilities as a member of the board and a member of the leaders of the board. When it comes to HOA or COA financials, these are 10 questions to ask. Now, this isn't everything, right? These are just 10 questions to ask about the financial state of the HOA. Notice the very two things say business entity search. Do they have a registered business entity? Are they registered on the HOA registry? Those are two questions. Again, if they're not registered in those two spots, the code says they can't collect dues and they can't foreclose. They can't collect delinquent dues, I should say, or foreclose. To enforce, like if you're a member of an HOA presidency, or your clients are, here's how you're supposed to do things. If someone is violating the CCRs or violating your rules, or they're not paying their dues on time, you give them a notice of the violation. You do that in a way that the mail is registered. You follow up in the same way. Then you have an administrative hearing, okay, that's published, or I guess disclosed, I should say. Then you can start your lien and your lawsuit. You don't jump all the way to lien and lawsuit as you begin. If you do, you're skipping steps. And you might not have a valid lien. So notice a violation, follow up to see if the violation has been taken care of, administrative hearing, where you talked about consequences, then your lien, then your lawsuit. That's kind of the way that things work here. Okay, so I'm going to put in, I'm going to go ahead and recopy and paste the forms and the attendance roster information. If you haven't put your stuff in the class or in the split, let me change this here. Oh, that's not copying the right thing. Hey, bear with me for just a second.
Tucker, should I stop the recording?
Yeah, that's great. That's
Good.
great, Eric. I think we're all done here.